I recognize the Democrat leader.
I mentioned a few minutes ago that I had seen a video that sickened my stomach. A U.S. senator being manhandled, we now know, by federal agents and dragged out of a hearing room. Now there's a second video. It's even worse. He's been thrown to the ground, again, manhandled, brutally taken down, handcuffed. It was disgusting. Anyone who looks at it turns anyone who looks at this, it will turn their stomach to look at this video and see what happened. Reeks of totalitarianism. This is not what democracies do. Senator Padilla was there, legitimately in that building, to ask questions of what's going on in California, which everybody wants to know answers to. We don't get answers when we ask the administration questions in one way or another. So Senator Padilla was exercising his duty as a senator for his constituents to try and find out what happened. And instead, he gets manhandled, thrown out of the room, thrown out on the ground, and handcuffed. We need a full investigation immediately as to what happened and who did what and what's going to be done to see that this doesn't happen again to Senator Padilla or other American citizens who are seeking their right to redress. It's despicable. It's disgusting. It is so un-American. So un-American. We need answers. We need answers immediately. I yield the floor. I yield to my colleague from New Mexico.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I'm sure the American people right now are just starting to see what happened to the United States Senator from California, the senior senator from California, Alex Padilla. He's at a press conference in California where the Secretary of Homeland Security is, and he wants to ask some questions. With all this going on in California, look, I don't know what all happened. Federal agents took him down. Took down a United States senator that they're doing their job. Why aren't more people down here speaking up about this nonsense? This is ridiculous. I'd use some other language, but I'd probably get tossed off the floor right now. Growing up on a small farm and cleaning a barn, my dad taught me how to take a shovel to all the stuff that came out of the animals. You know what that's called. I know what it's called. And some of the animals that did that were males. They were bulls. And the stuff that came out of them has a few names to it. I'll call it manure today. This is nonsense. This is awful. How can these federal agents get away with this? Is the President of the United States telling folks to go down and start arresting United States senators, taking them down to the floor? Is that what we've come to? The executive branch doing this to our colleagues? This is a Democrat. What happens when it happens to a Republican? Will I hear from my Republican colleagues then to say, no, we should not do this, Mr. President? Back down, back off, you are wrong? Will someone here have the backbone to tell the President of the United States, you crossed the line, stop it? I'm so disappointed. So disappointed. And as a Latino United States Senator, for this to happen to another Hispanic here, there's several of us that are Hispanics here, Democrats and Republicans. Speak up. When one of my predecessors was here, Dennis Chavez, there were places he could not eat in this town because of the color of his skin, because he was from a state called New Mexico. Are we going to use our voices? Are we better than this in the United States of America? Or are we going to show all the other folks in the world that choose to do this to the people that were duly elected by their people? No, just go arrest them, throw them down on their face, treat them like garbage. We're better than this in America, y'all. We got to speak up. I hope by tonight every Democrat and Republican member of this body has the courage to say something. This has gone too far. It's not right. I yield back.
As the senator from Oregon.
Thank you. I ask the quorum call be officiated.
The Senate is not in a quorum call.
I've come to the floor to say extremely outraged that the executive branch's security team have shoved a U.S. senator out of a room, have proceeded to put that U.S. senator on the ground and to handcuff that senator. This is what we expect to see in authoritarian nations. They can't tolerate a question, and they start to attack the institutions. This is what we're seeing in the U.S. right now. We're seeing it in the form of the president willfully breaking the law on the rules controlling the executive branch time and time again. We see it in his attack on the press, his attack on the universities, his attack on extorting law firms. We see it in the form of his using the Trump versus United States lawsuit to say, I, the president, am above the law, and I can issue pardons, so the whole executive branch is above the law. That is not the way it works in a republic. At least, it's not the way it works if we are a republic. If we, through a subservient Congress and a combination with a deferential Supreme Court, slide into this authoritarian state, then we have failed our oath to the Constitution. It is absolutely wrong that any U.S. senator, for attempting to ask a question, be treated in this fashion. I double down on the call of Leader Schumer. This merits a full bipartisan investigation. Bipartisan because all of us are members of the legislative branch. All of us have taken an oath to the Constitution, and all of us should stand up for each other and certainly our ability to explore the policies of this administration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from New Jersey.
I never thought I would imagine having to stand here and discuss what I saw today. A United States senator in his own community, in the city in which he grew up, elected under the authority of the people, stepping forward to get answers to legitimate questions. And we see him being thrown to the ground after being removed from a room forcibly and put into handcuffs by multiple people. This, to me, is such an abuse of authority. It is a violent act, and there can be no justification of seeing a senator forced to their knees, laid flat on the ground, their hands twisted behind their back, and being put into restraints. If you see the video, at that point, he's not fighting, he's not pushing. But this is a pattern and a practice. This is not an isolated incident. I remind people that in my own community, in the city of Newark, we had a congresswoman and a mayor at a facility. The mayor invited into the gate the congresspeople, invited into a conference room, and then the mayor asked to leave, who did leave, and then numerous agents run out to arrest that mayor. Now, the judge in this case said it was outrageous, reprimanded the Trump administration for the arrest in and of itself. We see time and time again with this administration trying to precipitate a response by the misuse and the abuse of force. This is more akin to authoritarian governments. When you see a democratic nation having their executive begin to arrest mayors, begin to arrest judges, begin to arrest a United States senator who is simply asking for answers to their questions, to remove them from a room forcibly, to throw them to the ground, to put them in restraints. This is something that we should not tolerate. And by we, this is not Democrats and Republicans. This is we in this body. We have a constitutional obligation to provide oversight to the executive, a constitutional obligation to ask questions, to make inquiries, a constitutional obligation to check and balance the authority of the executive. And so here we saw before our eyes a senator in their district, in their state, asking questions, and we see him being shoved out of a room, but it did not stop there. Shoved to the ground, shoved onto his belly, and have his arms pulled behind his back. This should outrage every United States senator. This should outrage every United States senator. I would like to yield the floor to my colleague.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Excuse me, I would
The
like
senator-
to.
the
Question.
senator-
I would yield to a
Question.
question.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I will yield to a question while retaining the right to the floor. While retaining the right to the floor.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just watched footage of our colleague, my California colleague, Senator Alex Padilla, being forcibly removed from a briefing by the Secretary of Homeland Security's staff. He went there to observe and to ask questions, and I watched with horror on this video, seeing these agents grab my colleague, my fellow senator from California, grab him, push him out of the hearing as he was identifying himself as a U.S. senator, bring him into a hallway, bring him down to the ground, bring his arms behind his back. I saw this happen to my colleague, and I am shocked by how far we have descended in the first 140 days of this administration, where we have a president calling out the military over the objection of a governor to try to intimidate and interfere with law enforcement in California, calling out the Marines to try to inflame tensions in our city, and now this latest act when a U.S. senator goes to demand questions about the lawfulness or lawlessness of these actions, to see him tackled to the ground, brought to the ground. What is becoming of our democracy? Are there no limits to what this administration will do? Is there no line they will not cross? We see lawlessness after lawlessness. We see threats to judges of impeachment and of physical harm. We see arrests of members of Congress. And now this. All of us have lived as part of a generation since World War II that was used to seeing our freedoms ever expanding. We saw walls coming down. We saw new democracies being born. We came to think that somehow this was inevitable, like the laws of nature, that it was the moral arc of the universe always bending towards justice, only to see that it was not bending towards justice. And to see this now at home, to see in the United States of America, the executive use force like this against a member of a co-equal branch of government, to see that it has come to this already, and not a peep yet from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, no whisper of dissent yet. I hope that changes. I hope that changes. The founders separated the powers between the executive and the legislative and the judiciary because they wanted to set ambition against ambition, ambition of one institution against another to protect all of our freedom. But that requires that we go beyond our partisan affiliations. And when something is wrong, dead wrong, when something is a threat to our democracy, that we call it out regardless of party. And this is wrong. This is wrong. We ask How do you lose a democracy? How does one lose a democracy? This is how you lose a democracy. Actions like today, but even more importantly than what has just happened is what will happen in the next 24 hours. Will this be roundly condemned? Will this be roundly condemned, or somehow will we just fall down some partisan line again and see another leap towards autocracy in this country? Alex Padilla is one of the most decent people I know, one of the most dedicated public servants I know, someone of just the greatest character. We all know him well in this institution. He embodies public service. He never forgot where he came from. He came from very humble origins, and he never forgot where he came from. And the beauty of this country is you could come from a very humble origin and you could end up here. When I first got here, John Tester, a farmer from Montana and a senator from Montana, told me about a conversation he had with John D. Rockefeller when he got here. And he said, Rockefeller told him, you and I came from very different places, but we both ended up here. It's the beauty of America that Alex Padilla could end up here by dint of his brilliance and his integrity and his compassion. And all of that is at risk. All that is at risk right now if we let the abusive handling of this good man and so many other good men and women around the country, if we let this go without our firmest opposition, without our strongest pushback, without our strongest defense of our democracy. And with that, I ask the gentleman from New Jersey whether he will yield to the gentlewoman to my right.
I intend to yield, but...
I don't mean yield, but yield for a question.
May I, excuse me, let me consult the parliamentarian for just a second, The 10 minutes allotted to the senator under morning business has expired. Another senator may seek recognition in his or her own right. The senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon to the United States Senate, a place where people are elected by their constituents to come here to be their voice. Every one of us, Republican, Democrat, elected by the people who we represent, to come here and be their voice and to do the job. What is that job? To make sure that we are being their voice and speaking out for them, and part of that has to be asking questions. That part of that has to be demanding accountability. That has to be getting information so we can do the best job possible. It is unacceptable that a United States senator in his own home state, elected by millions of people, went to ask a question for his constituents to get an answer and was brutally thrown to the ground and handcuffed. That is wrong, and I cannot believe that we don't have senators on both sides of the aisle calling this out as outrageous. This is what a democracy is about, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is about us coming to the United States Senate, speaking out, asking questions, getting information so we can be their voice. What happens when that voice is stifled? What happens when that voice is thrown to the floor and handcuffed? Our democracy is lost. Mr. President, I have been here for more than 32 years. I have come to this floor often to speak out, to be angry, to be a voice for my people. I have never come this close to having tears in my eyes as I speak to both sides of this aisle about this horrendous incident that occurred. We are a democracy, but we can lose that democracy. It can be gone. unless all of us speak out and forcibly reject what happened to a United States Senator, and to send the message that in this democracy, it is just, it is right, it is part of our responsibility to speak up, to ask questions, and to be able to have the knowledge we need to represent the people that we come here for. We use our voices, Mr. President. We use our votes, Mr. President, to be a part of this democracy, not violence. When violence is done by someone representing this administration in a forceful way against a United States Senator, how does any one of us go home and tell our constituents that they can be part of a democracy, speak out about what they believe in? This is so wrong. This is so wrong. Mr. President, I hope others speak up and speak out, and as a voice we say, we want our democracy to succeed, and in order to succeed, we need to be able to use our voices and to use our votes and to ask questions without being forcibly thrown to the ground, without being arrested, by speaking up. I say to the entire country, we have a democracy. We will lose it if we can't use our voices. We will lose this democracy. None of us should be silent. None of us. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, this feels like a defining moment for the country, but also for this body. I understand that it may take a few moments for our Republican colleagues to watch the full video, to gather some additional facts, to come to a conclusion. But we need our Republican colleagues to be on the floor right now with us. This is not simply an assault on Senator Padilla. This is not an assault on Democratic senators. This is an assault on the rule of law. This is an assault on our democracy. And ultimately, we are robbing the ability of every single senator to do our job if we are now going to be threatened with violence when we simply try to stand up for our constituents. Now, we all have town halls, and we are all often met with constituents who oppose us, sometimes very vocally. But speaking for myself, I don't ask law enforcement to throw my constituents to the ground and violently handcuff them because they have a different opinion from me. You know why I don't do that? Because we don't do that in a democracy. We don't do that against ordinary citizens, and we certainly don't allow the administration and the law enforcement that works for the administration to do that to a United States senator. We will enter a banana republic if we don't find a way, Republicans and Democrats, to come together around this essential question of protecting our ability, our right as senators to speak up for our constituents. Now, I understand that my Republican colleagues are going to need some time to gather the facts, but we already have a statement from the Department of Homeland Security that has accused Senator Padilla of being disrespectful, as if that is a rationalization for violence. Watch the video. Even if you believe that he was disrespectful, and given the times, that is certainly in the eye of the beholder, that never justifies what we saw on that video. Throwing anyone, never mind an elected representative of the people, to the ground to be handcuffed. They say that he didn't identify who he was, and yet watch the video. He clearly states, "I am Senator Alex Padilla." They're going to spin this, but I'm begging my Republican colleagues, don't let them do it. Protect our ability as servants of the people to speak up for the people that we represent. make sure that we do not normalize this kind of violence simply because the White House doesn't agree with people who dissent. If this is how a United States senator can be treated, then none of us ultimately are immune. If this is how a United States senator can be treated, none of our constituents are safe. This is a test for the country, but this is a test for the United States Senate as well. I yield the floor.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, 2 days from today, June 14, is Flag Day in the United States. It's the day every year where we celebrate the flag, but it's not the piece of cloth that we celebrate. We celebrate core American values. And the most core American value is the one that we take an oath of office to, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution includes a Bill of Rights, and one of the most important pieces of the Bill of Rights is the First Amendment. It was drafted by a Virginian, James Madison. And it talks about the fact that there can't be laws or legal restrictions against the right of the people to peacefully assemble and petition government for redress of grievances. That right is not something we're allowed. That right is something we're guaranteed. My colleague and our friend, Alex Padilla, born and raised in Los Angeles, loves his hometown, an MIT-educated, baseball-playing engineer who returned to his home, who served on the Los Angeles City Council, and now serves in this body, has some very legitimate questions about why, in an unprecedented way, the National Guard and the United States Marines have been deployed into his city over the objections of the mayor, over the objections of the governor, in a historically unprecedented way, and in a way such as to escalate tensions in his town rather than to reduce them. So he decided to go to a peaceful public assembly. It was a press conference. It wasn't a private meeting to which he was not allowed entrance. A press conference's purpose is to share information with the public. My colleague, Alex Padilla, who goes to Wednesday prayer breakfast with me every week with a bipartisan group of colleagues, attended a public event so he could ask a question about why his hometown was being besieged by Marines and National Guard over the objection of the mayor and the objection of the governor. His question was a grievance. He doesn't agree with the policies of the administration. He is guaranteed in this document the right to petition government for redress of grievances. As an American, this is what we are supposed to do. The framers of the Constitution that put this in the First Amendment did it to protect the rights of Alex Padilla and all of us, but they did it for another reason. They did it because they believed it would help democracy work better. That democracy works better when people can speak freely. Democracy works better when people can profess their religion, when the press can operate freely, and democracy works better when people can gather peacefully and share their dissenting points of view. It makes our democracy work better. Make no mistake, the effort to manhandle our colleague, to push him out of the room for asking an inconvenient question, to handcuff him, is an attempt to shut him up. It's an attempt to shut everybody up if you have a dissenting view from this administration. That's why the administration has deployed the military in an unprecedented way. They want to intimidate you. They want to make you decide that although you are granted this as a right, they want to make you afraid to exercise the right. And so as I conclude, I would just say this. On Flag Day, I would encourage Americans of all kinds, find a peaceful assembly on June 14th, on Flag Day, and attend it. and show that you are a brave and patriotic American that embraces the First Amendment to the Constitution, and you will not allow anyone to intimidate you. I was a missionary in Honduras in 1980 and 81, and it was an authoritarian society, and no one was guaranteed the right to assemble or complain. You might do it and be okay one day, the next day you might be arrested, the next day you might be disappeared or even killed. That's not who we are. We need brave, patriotic Americans to stand up, just as Senator Padilla has done, and insist upon their right to peacefully assemble and present whatever critiques or complaints they have about policies that they find to be objectionable. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from New Jersey.
I have no words to describe just the absurdity of this moment and the dangers to our country and our union. For us to be able to stand here on the floor of the Senate, in this chamber that many such important decisions have been made in, a place of deliberation, it is not only in this room that we as senators should be able to voice the concerns that we have about the direction of our country and the problems that our nation faces. That we get to be sworn in as United States senators. That we try to do our best, that we are U.S. senators, that United States senators, that we represent this entire nation as a body. And the idea that just as I just saw the video, one of my colleagues here thrown to the floor, handcuffed, humiliated. It is not a humiliation of that individual senator, it is a humiliation of this body. The shamefulness by which that was perpetrated. That Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, shame upon those that instigated this, that followed through on this. It is something that all of us collectively need to stand against. This isn't about partisanship. It's about what does this institution, what does this body mean, and whether or not our words and our actions, as dictated by our oath that we swear to the Constitution of Article 1 as well, that lays out what our job is, that is very much under threat right now. And I feel for my colleague. I don't know what is happening right now. I hope that we are able to get greater clarity about that. But what we see and what we saw in that video transpire, I hope that is something that every American in this country sees. That they see the actions that have taken place. And as someone who has worked in other nations, I worked in diplomacy and national security, I worked in nations with authoritarian leadership. I never thought I would see anything like this here at home. Transpire here in the way that we saw it unfold. Again, the humiliation befalls our body as a whole. Now the question is, what will the Senate do to stand up for ourselves? And that is something that I hope every single senator is thinking about right now. This is not a time to put your finger up in the air and figure out which way the wind is blowing. Try to think through what type of reaction might come from the White House if we speak out against this. This is a time for us to stand up together and stand up for each other and for this institution. And not just right now, it's about what credibility do we have as a body going forward. And I know, I get it, I'm new here. I'm one of the newer members here. I came here, I wanted to serve in this body because of what it stood for. I wanted to serve in this institution because I believe that this is an institution of incredible honor, integrity, and even at this challenging moment in this country's history, we need this body to be able to come together. So I call on all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to condemn this action, to stand united with one voice, standing up for ourselves. Otherwise, we will just cast ourselves to the margins of irrelevance in this nation right now. What point is it for us to stand up and show up to work every day if this is the kind of treatment that can befall any of us in this day right now in this country? I am outraged, and I hope others are too. This is not a time to be silent. This is a time for us to be united and show the rest of the country what this institution means. Otherwise, we might as well go home. I, for one, want to fight for my colleague, fight for each other, fight for the Senate, and fight for our democracy. With that, I'll yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator,
President,
Senator from Hawaii.
you know, I've given a lot of speeches on this floor, and this is the least prepared but the most clear I will ever be. This is the stuff of dictatorships. It is actually happening. A United States senator was manhandled, shoved to the ground, and cuffed. He identified himself. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. That should be enough. That should be enough. A United States senator who is, by the way, protected by the speech and debate clauses of the Constitution of the United States and a specific statute that allows him to oversee immigration facilities. And he says, I'm a senator and I have a question. And to Chris Murphy's point, they said, well, he was being disrespectful. Being disrespectful is legal. Being disrespectful is American. Being disruptive is okay if it's just using your words and not your body. This is the stuff of dictatorships, and the thing that is making me most terrified is I see zero Republicans, except for the presiding officer, in this chamber. And I understand. If it's not a member of your own party, you want some context. There is no context that justifies this action. Alex Padilla is not required to be impeccable in every single way in order to exercise his responsibilities as an American and as one of the two that represents California in the United States Senate. This is the stuff of dictatorships. One of the officers who throws him to the ground, as he's clearly complying, cuffs him face down on the carpet. And they say, there's no recording in here. It's a damn press conference. It's for recording. They didn't want to hear his speaking. And if the internet got it accurately, the secretary was there and delivering her remarks within earshot the whole time. She has command authority over those agents who are arresting a leader in the legislative branch. This is not some thing on the internet for us to argue about. We all know what we saw. We all know what we saw. I remain hopeful that Leader Thune and other Republicans can walk us back from the brink. But I am not so sure anymore. So as Trump's Department of Homeland Security raises the stakes and continues with a series of provocations to justify increasingly authoritarian actions, we have two obligations. One is to establish that as a legislative branch, we are not going to stand for this. And the other is those people who are peacefully protesting, be very disciplined this weekend. Be very peaceful this weekend. If we are going to win, we need to maintain the high ground. And I don't mean we blue, we Democrats. I mean we Americans who believe in this system of government. I have never, ever, other than January 6th, been so outraged at the conduct of an administration. I yield the floor.
From Arizona.
Mr. President, I have to say this week stood out for me personally with some positive notes and some real downers. The week didn't start great. We saw the President of the United States, for the first time, I think, in possibly my lifetime, send troops without a request from a governor into a state because people were protesting. And sure, some could make an argument that maybe a few protesters got over somebody's perceived line, but they were largely peaceful protests. And what the president did is beyond his authority. It's illegal. And it was not a good start to the week, I have to say. But, Mr. President, I also have to say there were some positive things this week. I got to meet your grandson. I think he said he was 15 years old. He got to go to the Air and Space Museum, a place that I love, a place that makes our country stand out in the best of ways. You know, shows what we can do when we work together, when we bring the full force of the United States behind doing things that are positive. We sent people to the moon in the 1960s. Your grandson got to see some of that hardware over at the Air and Space Museum. But I also have to say that the end of this week was rather outrageous and horrific. And it was brought to the American people, I strongly believe, because of the attitudes of this president and his ability to just work outside of the boundaries of what most Americans feel are in accordance with our values and our ethics. What happened today to Senator Padilla was outrageous. It was violent. It's a scary thing to see happen in the United States of America. Alex Padilla is a great guy. He is thoughtful. He is passionate. He is just trying to serve his constituents in the best way he knows how. By doing the thing that is in our Constitution, freedom of speech, Article 1, by exercising his constitutional rights and his rights as a United States Senator to ask some questions of government officials, he was doing his job. His job is oversight. Oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. This is in a federal building, and this didn't happen in isolation. The Trump administration has arrested a mayor and a member of Congress and a labor leader. The other day, I think, I mentioned the one highlight of this week, which was your grandkid, and the low light is, besides this, at the end of the week, is what happened at Fort Bragg the other day. The President of the United States going to a U.S. military base and using soldiers as political props. That is not who we are as a country. And I have to say, Mr. President, what I saw today is leading us down a dangerous path. And we cannot retreat to partisan corners. Senator Schatz mentioned, other than you, Mr. President, I don't think there are any other Republicans showing outrage for one of their colleagues on the other side of the aisle being violently handled by law enforcement. This is wrong. This is not putting our country first. And I have to say, I hope we can turn things around here in the coming weeks. But in my lifetime, and certainly my time in public office and my time serving this country, I have never seen anything like I have seen this week. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
I was on my way to the floor to talk about clean energy policy this afternoon, but I have got to join my colleagues in addressing the shocking video out of Los Angeles. I've now looked at it. If you're following at home, our colleague, Senator Padilla, was carrying out his constitutional responsibilities to conduct oversight and defend the people he represents. And at that time, he was physically accosted and shoved out of a press conference, pushed to the ground, and handcuffed at a press conference being held by Kristi Noem. It is a horrifying video, truly horrifying. And I'm of the view, Mr. President, why I especially wanted to come to the floor. It is not about a happening to a United States senator. Here is what it's about. If they'll do this to a sitting United States senator in front of a room full of media, imagine what is being done to powerless people in secret. In Portland, in my hometown, we've had firsthand experience with this kind of activity. Faceless, unidentifiable agents with guns staring down peaceful protesters. In Portland, there was a wall of moms. My neighbors, we all said then it's un-American, and I say it again this afternoon. What we have seen on our screens is un-American. It doesn't have the support of the American people for this kind of anti-democratic conduct. And I'll close simply by saying this, Mr. President. This has got to change. Peaceful Americans cannot have this kind of abuse rain down on them for the next 3.5 years. It has to end now. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The senator from Massachusetts.
this is a horrifying moment in our nation's history. Today, United States Senator Alex Padilla was violently removed from a public briefing for asking questions on behalf of the people he represents. People in California who deserve answers about the brutal crackdown on protesters. I've watched the video, as many of you have as well. Let me just describe what it shows. Officers pushed Senator Padilla backwards out of the room as he said the words, "I am Senator Padilla. I have questions for the secretary." He was then shoved to the ground. When the senator complied with the officers and went on his knees, he was forcibly pinned onto his stomach. He was ordered to put his hands behind his back. He can be heard on the video saying he is trying to comply with their orders. Officers then put handcuffs on the senator while he was lying on the ground. His staff was then told to stop recording the handcuffing. He was put in handcuffs for asking a simple question. He was put in handcuffs for doing his job as a United States Senator. He was put in handcuffs for standing up for the Constitution of the United States. He was put in handcuffs for representing the people of California. Now, if you're not yet convinced that President Trump and his administration are trying to suppress free speech, then just watch the video. Watch the video. If you are not yet convinced that President Trump and his administration are trying to undermine the foundations of our democracy, watch the video. If you are not yet convinced that President Trump and his administration are hell-bent on punishing people with differing opinions than those of the president, then watch the video. And here's the really chilling part. Make no mistake. What happened to Senator Padilla today is happening every day all across this country. Every day, DHS agents are throwing people to the ground and violently handcuffing them while they are not resisting, detaining them for exercising their First Amendment rights of free speech. Every day, Donald Trump is making this nation look more and more like a fascist state. If this is how federal agents treat a United States senator who peacefully asks questions of this administration, then we all have to ask, how far will they go? How violent will they get? I know my Republican colleagues can see what happened today was wrong. But will any Republican senator speak up for our democracy? They know Senator Padilla's character. They know that Senator Padilla is a kind man, a man who is concerned for his children, a man who is concerned for his home, a man who has dedicated his life to public service, a man who is a patriot. Where are our Republican colleagues? Where is the Republican Senate? Where are you? Stand up and speak out. This is a continuation of what we've been seeing. Intimidate every other check on presidential power in this country. Fire the civil service, get rid of those people. Threaten to imprison judges. Criminally charge House members who try to visit an ICE facility. Arrest senators who ask questions. This is not a drill. This is an assault on our democracy. I am calling on my Republican colleagues to join us in demanding a bipartisan investigation into this incident. What happened at this press conference was disgraceful, it was un-American, and every member of the United States Senate should condemn it and condemn it now. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I come to the floor to join my colleagues to express outrage over the actions taking place in Los Angeles when our dear colleague, Alex Padilla, Senator Padilla, was thrown out of an event where he was just simply trying to express his opinion on behalf of the millions of Californians that he represents. It's so interesting to me that this situation happened because not that long ago, in the state of Washington, in Olympia, we had a bill signing, and it's no secret in the state of Washington that a guy named Tim Eyman is probably the antithesis of what our governor, Bob Ferguson, believes. He fights him on all sorts of initiatives to the people about policies that Mr. Eyman wants to express. So he's a noted individual in our state. So Mr. Eyman shows up at a press conference to basically protest a bill that the governor is going to sign. And he gets into the governor's office and he stands right behind our governor. One of our legislators who basically wants the governor to know that this individual who he disagrees with doesn't support this bill has now snuck into the governor's press conference. So what does our governor do? He turns around and he looks at Mr. Eyman and he says, "Oh, why are you here?" And he said, "I'm here to protest this." And the governor turns around and delivers his remarks. Because you know why? Because our governor was not afraid what Tim Eyman said. Our governor didn't think you threw him out of the building, and he's just a constituent. It's not like he's a state rep. It's not like he got elected by people. Our governor was not afraid to let this voice be heard. But somehow, ICE and Homeland Security are afraid of the voice of Alex Padilla. They are afraid of Alex Padilla's presence in a room. Now, how can that be in the United States of America, that a senator elected by the people of his state who simply wants to go to a public meeting and have his voice heard on behalf of his constituents is handcuffed and thrown to the ground? It's not acceptable. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle need to say, this is not acceptable. Are we trying to freeze the voice of dissent? Are we trying to say that we cannot understand what true public policy discourse is about? I think we showed in Olympia, Washington, that we're big enough to take it, that we know that somebody disagrees with us, we're not going to get them thrown out. And in this case, to have a United States senator handcuffed and thrown to the ground is disrespectful. It is an atrocity. We need to understand how this is happening. And if this administration or this side of the aisle thinks that is the way you treat the voice of a United States senator expressing dissent, I thank the president and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I stand today and I am shaking. I am so angry. I am so enraged with the treatment that I witnessed today of my colleague, Senator Padilla. This is not the America that each of us comes here each day to stand on behalf of. There are some who are saying they don't recognize this America, and I want to ring the bell today for all who are watching, for all who are listening. We have now crossed the line. This is a dangerous day in the history of our country when a senator who was in a federal building where he had a right to be, to do an oversight responsibility on behalf of the citizens who have elected him to the Senate of the United States. And when he was there to carry out his duties, he was there peacefully, and he decided to ask a question. And in Donald Trump's America, asking a question and pushing back caused him to be manhandled for the whole world to see, manhandled, treated like a person who had come off the streets. The thuggish behavior that I saw today is absolutely unacceptable. To put hands on this peaceful man who is not only a senator, he's a father, he's a husband, he's a person, he's a venerable part of our society, who was there on behalf of the people who have elected him and who was treated violently today. You could see his hands up in the air. You could see his hands up in the air, and that was not enough. He was taken to the ground and he was handcuffed. And what was the explanation that was given? It was an explanation that any reasonable person can look and knows will be a full-on lie, that he looked like an attacker. Well, if this doesn't cause every person under the sound of my voice to shudder today, I don't know what to say about it, because today it's Senator Padilla, and you know what? Tomorrow it can be any one of us. This is not what democracy looks like. This is anything but a democracy. The right to free speech is sacred in our country. The right to free speech is sacred. And today we watched it violated in horrible ways that we will account for. We as a country, if we continue along this road, I tell you, we will account for it. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. This injustice cannot stand. This cannot stand. And I tell you, America, let's be careful. We cannot continue along this road. We absolutely cannot. We must continue to encourage and allow free speech. It is the right of every person in this country. And today I am sickened and I am angry, and something must happen. These people must be held to account for what happened to Senator Padilla today. I yield.
Mr. President.
The senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, you can see and feel and hear the anger, the disappointment, the concern for the future of our country.
Delaware.
Mr. President, you can see and feel and hear the anger, the disappointment, the concern for the future of our country. Senator Alex Padilla is probably one of the first people that took time to sit down with me as a freshman senator, to prepare me for this job. He serves this body and his state with intelligence and with grace and with poise. And so to see my colleague pushed, manhandled, taken to the ground, arms put behind his back, this person who anyone who meets will say is more of a gentle giant than someone who deserves that kind of treatment? It blows my mind. I think that's the thing. I am shocked. I am numb. I am angry. And I think part of it is because Senator Padilla is a senator, but there are people every day, right now, across this country who are facing this kind of concern of their treatment, of peacefully trying to exhibit the voice of America. But also for him, he was just doing his job of oversight. Similarly, some of us also have spoken up about LaMonica McIver from New Jersey, also a member of Congress doing her job, oversight. If we don't have the ability as senators and congresspeople, what does that mean for all of the citizens of this country? And so in this moment, this is a pivotal moment. This is an opportunity for our leadership here in this chamber, as well as the other members on Democratic side and the Republican side, to say this is unacceptable. That's really what this is about. When the incident happened, we were all on this floor. And I remember seeing the video and the shock that I felt. It literally took my breath away. And I turned to other members on the floor to say, have you seen this? And they had not seen it. I walked across the aisle to my Republican colleagues. They had not seen it. And there was a sense of shock as well. And so what remains to be seen is what we do with that shock, what we do with that indignation, what we do with the fact that Alex Padilla was doing his job on behalf of his constituents and on behalf of this country. That's what remains to be seen. Where do we go from here? And so you have heard folks talk about free speech, peaceful assembly, the ability to do our jobs of oversight. But ultimately, what this is about the foundation of this country. And so I'm just shaking my head. I'm shaking my head, but I'm also resolute in the fact that we were called here for this moment. As bad as things may be, as bad as they may seem, we were called here for such a time as this. And the question is, what do we do with this time? And so, Mr. President, I ask my colleagues, again, on both sides of the aisle, to speak up against not only this incident, but the incidents that we are seeing across this country. I ask my colleagues to come together on behalf of not only the American people, but the democracy on which this country stands. And I will continue to stand with Alex Padilla. I will continue to stand with those folks around this country who are facing this same kind of unacceptable behavior. Lastly, I would also mention that we do have a role and responsibility. There are 3 branches of government. Thank God for the courts right now holding it down. But this moment is the moment. There won't be a light switch that says, oh, democracy is gone. That's not how it happens. I've heard my good friend Chris Murphy talk about that it's piece by piece, moment by moment, we see it chipped away. Well, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to make sure that we do not let this slip away. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back.
Mr. President.
The senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, having just viewed a video of my friend and colleague, Senator Alex Padilla, being manhandled, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed, after identifying himself as Senator Alex Padilla and attempting to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, in Los Angeles, I am shaken. I am angry. And I am gravely concerned about our path forward in this body and our nation. Democracy is a gift hard-won and hard-earned by the sacrifice of millions who have served, fought, and died, some in moments of tumult and challenge on the beaches of Normandy, on the fields of Gettysburg. From the very beginning of our nation to this moment, millions of Americans have stepped forward and said, I will risk it all so that my children and those I do not know can live free lives, knowing the burdens of tyranny, knowing what it meant to live under the heel of a king. Our forefathers risked everything. In nations around the world that I have visited on your behalf as a senator, people yearning for freedom and people recently free have come and spoken about how much the American example means to them. Earlier this year, I was at a global security conference, concerned about what was happening in our nation, about our division and the dialogue, and I heard 3 young parliamentarians from other countries talk about how hard they were working. Part of our job, Mr. Speaker, as senators, is to ask hard questions, is to pose challenges, is to test the cabinet of the president, to visit federal facilities, to ask questions that are sometimes uncomfortable or unwelcome. Just this week, I was at 3 committee hearings and had 3 members of the cabinet in front of me. Did they want to answer my questions? Probably not, but they did. If a senator of the United States who identifies himself as a senator, in at least the video I just saw, gets handled this way, gets thrown to the ground and handcuffed, what is happening to those who have no such title or voice? If this gentle and decent and caring man is treated this way, what is happening along the margins, in the dark spaces, in the places we cannot see? So, Mr. President, I call on my Republican friends and colleagues to look hard at this moment and say, what comes next? What comes next? Are we to be at risk of arrest if we threaten to ask a question or deign to interrupt? Is our very service here as senators hanging in the balance in this moment as we all learn more of the facts of what happened in Los Angeles? The future of what will happen here in our country and in the world will wait on your answer. Was this an over-response? Was this a misuse of force? Was this a disrespect of the very Senate itself? Is this a moment when, as our founders who wrote the Federalist Papers dreamed, my colleagues in the Senate will show their loyalty to the role, to the check and balance, to the independence of the Senate, more than they will show their loyalty to their party and their president, and demand an answer, an apology, and a different path forward? Or is this a moment when all of us will watch this video of our friend, a member of the Judiciary Committee, a representative, a senator of Los Angeles in the state of California, being roughly mishandled and say, too bad. At least it wasn't me. If we answer this moment with silence, we will be damned. And our children and the world will say they didn't really mean it. The members of my family who served in the U.S. military knew that signing on that line meant being willing to give everything. And I believe, and have been told, that they understood that service to be in service of freedom. not in service of any particular president or party, any particular state or moment, but in service of democracy. Democracy is a fragile flower, and around the world, people look to what we do to know what they should do. There are petty, tin pot dictators, authoritarians, and strongmen around the world who will watch this video and be encouraged and think this is the way to silence their critics. I can't imagine a member of this chamber who knows Alex Padilla, who's had the blessing of sitting with him in moments when he's asked questions or engaged in discourse, who thinks of him as anything other than a reasoned, reasonable, mild-mannered senator. But even if he were not, even if he were outspoken, loud, aggressive, annoying, the title senator and the role that we have should entitle him to ask a question at a press conference. If the result is this mistreatment, heaven help us all, and heaven help our democracy. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from New Jersey.
I want to thank the chair. Clearly, the voices of my colleagues and I are calling this what it is, which is a crossroads for this body. One of our members, it matters not what their party, who was in their state, was forcibly removed when he was asking for accountability from the executive branch. He was taken out of that room forcibly by multiple men who then, even when he identified himself, even when he was pulled out of that room, he was then forced to the ground, pushed upon his face, his hands wrenched behind his back, and he was put in restraints. This is a crossroads for this body. This is not a partisan issue. It is one about who we are as a body. Will we let the abuses of the executive branch physically take a member of this body and drive them to the ground and put them in restraints? And why? Why? Well, we are starting to get answers already. Here is Tricia McLaughlin, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. This is her statement. Senator Padilla chose disrespectful political theater and interrupted a live press conference without identifying himself or having his Senate security pin on as he, quote, lunged towards Secretary Noem. Mr. Padilla was told repeatedly to back away and did not comply with officers' repeated commands. Secret Service thought he was an attacker, and officers acted appropriately. The statement concludes that Secretary Noem met with Senator Padilla after and held a 15-minute meeting. We know this is not true because we hear with our own ears on the tape Senator Padilla identifying himself. Further, disrespectful political theater is not a justification to remove a United States senator in their own state at a public press conference and violently push them out of the room, drive them to the ground, put them on their stomach, and handcuff them. Disrespectful behavior, this is our democracy. You have a right to speak up. You have a right to free speech. You have a right to stand and do the job that you swore an oath in this chamber to do, to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And one of your jobs is to provide a check and a balance to the administration. One of your jobs is to give accountability to the administration. Now, I know the 100 members, the other 99 members of this body, and if disrespectful behavior is a justification for violent reprisal from the administration, how many members of this body? How many of this members of this body would be subjected to that? This is a farce of a justification. And therefore, we are at a crossroads. Will my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, will my Republican colleagues justify the treatment of one of the members of this body, justify the violence against one of the members of this body, justify a member of this body being thrown upon the ground and putting handcuffs for what? For disrespectful behavior. If you think it stops with one, you are inviting it for the all, because it does not. You are inviting it for every member of this body. If the Obama administration or the Biden administration said that a senator on the other side of the aisle was being disrespectful and threw that senator violently onto the ground and put him into handcuffs, this body would be full of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle condemning what the Biden Justice Department did or the Obama Justice Department. This should not be about partisanship. This should be about patriotism. This should not be about tribalism. It should be standing up and being a leader in this moment. This is wrong. This violence is wrong. But let me be more personal. I tried to understand why this particularly upset me. And I think my colleague from Delaware spoke to that because of Alex Padilla's reputation in this body, of being a kind and gentle person. We all know him, the goodness and the decency that he has. He is not one of the louder senators. He is not one of the performative senators. He has a reputation, as my colleague from Delaware said, on both sides of the aisle for being a gentle man. But I think what was really hard for me to see was that a member of this body was driven to his knees and made to kneel before authorities. That's what got me. I think when I saw him driven to his knees, forcibly, something there got me. You see, we know Alex Padilla's story. It is an unusual story for this body. His family came here as Mexican immigrants. His father was a short order cook. His mother cleaned homes. They did those jobs that don't always come with esteem or respect. They did those jobs in which when people see them, they sometimes look down on them. They did those jobs that are often marginalized despite their dignity. They raised their son to serve. He went to MIT. They raised their son to work hard, to show grit, to rise. And they got to watch their son become a city council person in LA. They got to watch their son ascend to be the Secretary of State for California. They got to watch their son come to this body. And this son of Mexican immigrants who cleaned homes and served food, this man with equal dignity in this body, today was driven violently to his knees, as if made to kneel before the authority of the executive, because he was so-called disrespectful. That should offend the consciousness, not just of the other 99 members of this body, it should offend the conscience of this country. Because if you can make Alex Padilla forcibly kneel before this executive, when does it stop? He's a United States senator. And if you could force him to kneel to his knees violently, when does it stop? What does it say to other Americans who want to speak up? What does it say to other Americans that want to exercise their constitutional duty? What does it say to other Americans this weekend when they want to peacefully protest? What does it say to other Americans from humble backgrounds who know poverty? That if a United States senator who stands up to do its job can be made to driven to his knees, violently handcuffed. What does it say? What message does it send? Everybody in this body should see that this is a crossroads. They treated a member of the United States Senate violently after he identified himself, dragged him out of a room, threw him upon the ground, and put him in handcuffs. Every member of this body should object to that. Why? Because the statement was that he was disrespectful. That is unacceptable. That is offensive. That is un-American. And so why is there silence right now? Why aren't my colleagues saying, I don't care if it's a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent? When you drive a man to his knees in the United States of America, that is wrong, that is wrong, that is wrong. This is a test. This is a crossroads. This is a day in which the character of this body will be defined. Alex Padilla, a man of infinite decency, generosity of spirit, who, whether you disagree with him or not, is so well liked in this body. Who today, in a time of understandable outrage in Los Angeles, went to be with his constituents to get answers. And when he walked into a room and saw a cabinet secretary and raised his voice to ask questions, he was met with violence. They heaped upon him indignities. They drove him to his knees and then to his face, and they put him in cuffs. Well, they didn't just assault the physicality of Alex Padilla. They did not succeed in assaulting his dignity. I know he rose off that ground with the same dignity he had before they threw him upon it. What they assaulted today is the dignity of this body. What is in question now is the truth of who we are and what we stand for. This is an abuse of power. This is a violent act unjustifiably taken on a member of this body. The question is, who will we be as a Senate? The question is, how will we respond? Will we defend this institution, or will we yield to the tactics of authoritarian, violent leaders? I see my colleague here from Maryland. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I thank my friend and colleague from New Jersey. And it's hard to contain our emotion appropriately on the Senate floor. This is a moment that every American should be outraged about, and every American should be angry. And not only angry about what happened to Senator Padilla, but fearful for our democracy, because we are at a crossroads when it comes to the rule of law and respect for our democracy and our Constitution in the United States of America. I felt compelled to cancel the rest of my meetings this evening to come right here to the floor to join my colleagues in speaking out. Not just for a fellow senator, but for the future of the rule of law and due process in the United States of America. I had to rewind that video like 3 or 4 times to see if this was really happening. And I saw the earlier video come out of him being essentially dragged out of the room, roughed up, and then the other video of him lying on his stomach, handcuffed, with people standing around him. Mr. President, then the lies went out. Senator from New Jersey just mentioned it. I'm reading this statement from the Department of Homeland Security. Senator Padilla chose disrespectful political theater, interrupted a live press conference without identifying himself. That's a lie. Just look at the video. You can see him coming in and saying, I'm Senator Padilla, the senior senator from California. He wanted to ask a question. We all have a lot of questions. He's the United States Senator. He should be able to ask a question about what's happening in his state of California. You know, we had the President of the United States just a few weeks ago, in response to a question, say he wasn't sure if he had to comply with the Constitution of the United States. The President of the United States, who's sworn to take an oath to uphold the Constitution, said he wasn't sure if he had to comply with the Constitution. You have senior administration officials like Steve Miller talking about suspending habeas corpus in the United States of America. Habeas corpus is the core to due process that makes sure that people cannot be deprived of their liberty without a fair trial and a fair hearing. And here we have Alex Padilla going in to ask a question, and he's tackled, he's roughed up, he's dragged out of the room, he's put on the floor and handcuffed. This is a president who also the other day, when asked if he would arrest the governor of California or whether his people should arrest the governor of California, he said, yeah, I think maybe they should. Think about that. This is an administration that arrested the mayor of a major city. This is lawless behavior from this administration. This is what a dictatorship looks like. This is what happens when one person tries to grab all the power. When they say, I don't know if I have to comply with the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States is designed to have checks and balances. It's designed to make sure that our liberties are protected. The Bill of Rights protect all of us. And yet you see the President of the United States and his henchmen and his henchwomen trampling over due process, trampling over the First Amendment in the country, and trampling on a United States senator from California who said, Madam Secretary, I have a question. I'm looking forward to hearing about what question Senator Padilla wanted to ask. Because I know Senator Padilla, and I know he had a good question to ask of the Secretary of Homeland Security, but he didn't get a chance. This was a press conference. Secretary of Homeland Security is taking questions. The United States Senator representing the people of that state, elected to represent the people of that state, he had a question. He didn't get to ask it because he was dragged out of the room and thrown on the floor and arrested. I want to know what that question was going to be. And I know that Senator Padilla will tell us. We'll probably find out then why the Secretary of Homeland Security didn't want to hear the question. Because this administration wants to shut down questions except for from the journalists that they like. They belittle journalists who ask them any question that they see as critical. That's also what authoritarian leaders do. They push aside the people who ask hard but meaningful questions and just call on the people that will ask them the slow ball question. You've already seen this at play in the Oval Office during press conferences that the president has. He goes, oh, I like that reporter. Oh, that's a terrible question. What he means is it's a question that he doesn't like. And usually the questions he doesn't like are questions that are right on target and go to the heart of what's happening in our country. And so Senator Padilla had a question. He just didn't get a chance to answer it. Now, I want to build on another point my colleagues have made, and that is a real appeal to our Senate Republican colleagues. Because in these first months, 4 or 5 months of the Trump administration, we've seen the actions of a lawless president. You know, it's unprecedented in the United States to have over 260 lawsuits filed in federal courts, right? This doesn't happen normally. It's because of the massive law breaking that we've seen going on. Attacks on civil liberties, attacks on due process as part of that, attacks on the First Amendment, the illegal withholding of funds that have been appropriated by the Congress. The courts can't do it alone, colleagues. Every member of this body is sworn to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution the President of the United States now says he's not sure if he has to comply with. I believe senators here want to take those constitutional responsibilities seriously. But if we're going to do that, we have to stand up at moments like this. Not Democratic senators alone, but Republican senators too. Because if you let the executive do this to Senator Alex Padilla today, some other executive, some other president can do it to somebody else tomorrow. If you can do this to Senator Alex Padilla, imagine how vulnerable other citizens and others in this country are to this kind of tyranny and abuse. So I hope this will be a moment, Mr. President, where people come together and stand up and say, regardless of policy differences on different issues, we're all here to debate those issues and disagree, but there's some things that we should consider fundamental and sacrosanct. And that is the idea of rule of law and due process. And what we witnessed here was the outrage that we are come to see in countries with authoritarian leaders. That's what we witnessed. And it's a pattern. But today was the most graphic example to date where a United States senator was essentially taken down as he introduced himself and said, I have a question. So I have a question for all of our colleagues. What are we going to do about it? Who are we? What do we stand for? Are we going to uphold the Constitution? So I'm looking forward to hearing the question Senator Padilla wanted to ask, but I also ask all of us a question. And that is, are we going to use this moment to stand up for decency and to stand up for the fair treatment of every American? And I yield the floor.
Correct. As a senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with my friend from Maryland. This has to be a moment where we just drop our political affiliations, where we decide that we are Americans, that the Constitution matters, that dissent defines America, and we say and do the right thing. And I think there is still time for our Republican colleagues here to speak out. I understand they may still want to collect more facts, but as each minute and each hour passes, it's becoming clear that the main justification seems to be simply that Senator Padilla was showing some level of disrespect. And the first comments from our Republican colleagues, I think if you're an American who cares about free speech, are really concerning. One of our colleagues in the Senate said this: Senator Padilla has a responsibility to his constituents to show up at work, not to try to make a spectacle of himself. Well, that is certainly a legitimate opinion, right? You can criticize any of us for engaging in spectacle, but spectacle is not illegal. Raising your voice is not a crime in this country. Protesting your government does not, cannot, and should not result in you being delivered to the ground by law enforcement and handcuffed. Another of our colleagues says, was he disruptive? Well, he got what he wanted. Once again, the standard here seems to be disruption. That if you are speaking truth to power, then you are going to be met by violence. The definition of this country, the fundamental nature of America, is that protest is not met with violence. Protest is celebrated in this nation. That what defines America against the rest of the world, against the totality of previous human history, is that we protect the right of human beings living in the United States of America to raise protest, loud protest, sometimes disruptive protest against their government. And frankly, we protect that right equally if it is a United States senator or an ordinary citizen with no formal power. And so we can say today, well, this is really dangerous that a United States senator got thrown to the ground and handcuffed simply because they spoke up at a press conference, but it is no more concerning that it is happening to a United States citizen than what is happening to many other citizens and residents of this country right now who are being met with equal physical force. We don't expect any different treatment of United States senators than of ordinary citizens. But many ordinary citizens in Los Angeles right now are being treated with the same kind of force that Alex Padilla was met with today. And so there is still time for us to come together and say, in this country, speaking truth to power, even in a disruptive way, is never rationalization for violence. But I will tell you, the first couple statements from my Republican colleagues are deeply worrying. They misread the fundamental nature of this country. And if we now live in a world where simple disagreement, vocal disagreement, where protest with this administration becomes justification for violence, I don't know how you can define that as America any longer. And as someone who was sitting in this chamber, I think this very same desk on January 6th, it shouldn't be lost on us that there are forms of political protest that are protected by this administration, celebrated even. And then there are forms of political protest, as you saw today, that are met with violence. There are individuals out on the street today in America who just a few years ago were in this building or on the outskirts of this building beating the hell out of police officers, viciously, savagely attacking police officers, tasers to the throat, rendering those police officers unconscious, metal poles being hammered onto the heads of police officers. In an exceptional moment, the President of the United States, in celebration of their violence, pardoned them, put them back out on the street, sending the unequivocal message that if you engage in violent protest on behalf of the White House, you get out of jail free. Pair that together with the message that is being received by the American public now on a daily basis, most prominently and visibly today. That if you engage in peaceful protest, Senator Padilla was asking a question. He identified himself as a United States senator. Of the administration, you will be met by violence. You carry out violence on behalf of the White House, you are excused. You lodge normal, protected protest against this White House, you are thrown to the ground and handcuffed, even if you're a United States senator, though it should not matter. And so the early reaction here, it should be chilling. Because once this becomes normalized, I don't know how you put it back in the bottle. We shouldn't assume that this democracy survives forever. This is a revolutionary experiment 250 years in. It's fragile. This idea that we govern ourselves, this idea that we respect through rule and force of law people who disagree with us. 0.0001% of humans have ever lived under a system like that in which they decide for themselves the law. Their protest, even against the most powerful people in the country, is protected by law. That idea is unnatural. It is in some ways almost destined to fall apart. And yet, for 250 years, we have not let it fall apart. We have decided that our fealty to that idea of free speech, of protected free speech, even if it rubs up against the ruling elites, the ruling class, the White House, the most powerful people in the country, in an uncomfortable way, will be protected. And so for 250 years, we have together, Republicans and Democrats, decided that that principle of free speech was more important than our political stripes, than loyalty to our party's leader or our party's ideas. And so at some point tonight, a Republican has to come down to this floor. At some point this weekend, some of our Republican colleagues have to speak out. On behalf of this fundamental American idea, on behalf of the United States Senate, on behalf of our colleague, we can still fight on tax policy and immigration policy. We can have big disagreements about the reconciliation bill. It will not harm my Republican colleagues' ability to render argument on the things that matter to them. It's okay for us to agree that what happened to Alex Padilla 2 hours ago crosses a line. It doesn't compromise my Republican colleagues' integrity as Republicans to decide that there is still right or wrong, that not everything is black or white, that 2 + 2 sometimes has to still equal 4. What happened to Senator Padilla should not have happened. He identified himself. It's not true that he didn't identify himself. What happened to him in the room is not justifiable, but certainly what happened to him outside the room isn't justifiable. Once he was removed from the room, being thrown to the ground as he is identifying himself as a senator, being handcuffed, can't be justified. So we're going to hang around on this floor in hopes that at some point, somehow, and I know not all of our Republican colleagues are still in town, speak up on behalf of this basic premise, this basic foundational idea of America, that even when protest rubs you the wrong way, even when you don't like the form or substance of it, that we are no longer the country that we love, the country that we teach our kids about, if we don't find a way to come together to object to protest being met with this kind of violence. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from California.
Mr. President, a little more than a couple hours ago, my friend and colleague, Senator Alex Padilla, attended a press conference in the federal building in Los Angeles, being held by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Instead of treating him with respect, instead of answering his questions, he was grabbed by her security detail. He was physically forced from the room, forced to the ground, his arms pinned behind his back. This assault on a member of the U.S. Senate is unlike anything I have ever seen, perhaps unlike anything anyone in this chamber has ever seen. And it crystallizes the threat posed to our country and its democracy. If the administration can so mistreat a member of this body, what can it do to every other American? What can it do to every other resident of the United States of America? What can it do to you? What can it do to your neighbor and to your community? The abusive treatment of Senator Alex Padilla, however, did not take place in isolation. It took place at a time of heightened tension in Los Angeles and around the nation. Earlier this week, I returned from my home in Los Angeles, a city in which thousands have peacefully protested the administration's harsh immigration policies, and in which the president has ordered the mobilization of thousands of National Guardsmen and hundreds of Marines in order to deal with a few hundred vandals and miscreants that local law enforcement was more than capable of subduing. And the question is, why? Why order in the military if they are not necessary? Why order in the military over the objection of local and state officials? Why go to the expense? Why go to the trouble? Why undertake such an obvious provocation? Why, in a city of over 500 square miles, did Donald Trump believe it was necessary to escalate so dramatically over the vile acts of a small number of people in the space of a few blocks? These are some of the questions I imagine that Alex Padilla wanted to ask the Secretary of Homeland Security. But now today we must add one more question. Why would they treat Senator Alex Padilla with such forceful and disgraceful disregard, forcing him to the ground? Why? And the answer involves failure and distraction and disrespect and disregard. Failure of the president's immigration policy, failure of his economic policy, a desire to distract from these failures, disrespect of our military and its role in civil society, and disregard of our democracy and the principles upon which our nation was founded. Let's start with failure, the failure of Donald Trump's immigration policy, the failure in particular of his promise to deport massive numbers of violent criminals, a failure that was inevitable because it was based on a lie, a foundational lie, foundational to his campaign and to his presidency, the original lie of the Trump campaign, the one he spoke as he descended the golden escalator in 2015 and suggested to the American people that most of the folks coming to this country as immigrants and migrants were murderers and rapists and violent criminals bent on doing harm to the American people. That foreign nations had opened their prisons and let out their worst offenders so they could come to the United States and destroy our way of life. It was a big lie. It was an audacious lie, but a lie that the president hoped he could ride a wave of fear that he could in turn ride into office. The truth, of course, is the vast number of people coming to this country are peaceful, hardworking people who want nothing more than an opportunity to get ahead, to enjoy a good life, and to provide for themselves and for their family. The American people understood this, but they also understood that our border was broken, that our system was chaotic, that the immigration itself, the system was itself broken, that asylum cases took too long to adjudicate, and people waiting lawfully to immigrate should be given priority of those who do not. As President Donald Trump promised, his focus would be on the deportation of violent criminals. But he also promised mass deportations, and the only way to square that conflict between the very specific and the very broad was to go back to that original lie, that all immigrants are violent criminals who mean us harm. If you can make the country believe that, you don't have to be targeted in your immigration raids. You don't have to go through the painstaking work of tracking down people with criminal records who don't want to be found. If you believe the lie that all immigrants are violent criminals, then you can do broad immigration sweeps at restaurants or on farms, in garment factories or high school graduations, in random neighborhoods and homes, or at the Home Depot. Just go out there and arrest illegal aliens, the president's deputy chief of staff, a frustrated Stephen Miller, demanded. after berating department officials for the slow pace of their operations. 3,000 arrests a day, the administration insisted on as a new quota, and gone was any pretense of looking for violent offenders. And so the indiscriminate raids and the indiscriminate cruelty began to multiply. People picking up people who show up for immigration appointments or take the oath of citizenship or to take that oath only to deport them. Separating fathers from their sons and daughters, mothers from their children, husbands from their wives. A farm worker who worked in the fields for decades, hard work, backbreaking work, work in the heat and the cold, work during a deadly pandemic when others stayed home, work that most U.S. citizens do not want to do and will not do, chased through the fields that they harvested to be taken away from their families. A mother chased down the street by hooded ICE agents away from her terrified and screaming teenage daughter. Americans did not vote for this, do not want this, and in the midst of this, the American people started to speak out, at first in small ways, in private conversations after the deportation of their neighbors, and then in more public ways, at town halls and in letters to the editor, on social media and in gatherings at their schools. And then as the raids increased in their scope and the scope of their cruelty, by taking to the streets as is our God-given right and also a right given by our Constitution. Some of those protests have taken place in Los Angeles, where Angelenos gathered to speak out against these actions, against the separation of families and the injury to our communities and our economy. And in the midst of these protests, some number of agitators were attracted by the conflict and saw it as an opportunity to vandalize, assault law enforcement, and engage in other reprehensible conduct. Like moths to a flame, every city has these miscreants, and so does Los Angeles. They care not about immigration policy or immigrants or migrants who are affected, and our state and local law enforcement are more than capable of dealing with them, and they did. But amidst the failure of his immigration policies and the backlash, Donald Trump saw an opportunity. His economic policy was in tatters. His tariff wars were not improving our trade with other nations, and instead were prompting the boycott of American goods by close allies like Canada and causing layoffs at American ports, higher prices at Target and Walmart and elsewhere. He had to fend off Amazon plans to include a line item for the Trump tariff tax on each transaction, which would have made it even more obvious to the American people that he was betraying the central promise of his campaign to bring prices down when they are going up. And his big, beautiful bill was in trouble over a big, ugly price tag. Far from reducing the debt or deficit, the bill was revealed to cost taxpayers a whopping $2.4 trillion added to the national debt. He was borrowing the money from our kids and our grandkids to fund a tax cut for himself and his rich friends. Even the world's richest man, and heretofore the president's biggest benefactor, Elon Musk, called the bill a disgusting abomination and made it clear that Republicans should be ashamed of voting for it. And the opportunity Donald Trump saw in all this failure was this: call in a distraction, call in the troops, call in the Marines, not to save a city, but to save himself from drowning in failure. And so he did. 4,000 troops from California's National Guard and 700 from the Marines. And the reaction in Los Angeles, of course, was the one that he desired: escalation, not de-escalation, more conflict, not less, more chaos, and the kind of chaos he thrives on, the kind of chaos where the insurrectionist come president, the man who, on his first day, pardoned hundreds of criminals who beat police officers, could somehow try to reclaim the mantle of a law and order president. It has not worked. It will not work. Americans have a long memory and will not soon forget the images of January 6th, when the president sat calmly in the White House dining room, dining on burgers and fries while our Capitol Police were under assault. And the same man who called in the Guard to handle a comparatively small number of criminals and vandals in LA refused to call in the Guard to stop thousands of them from ransacking this Capitol. The last time a president called in a National Guard over the objection of the governor of a state was in 1965, when the segregationist governor of Arkansas ignored a ruling of the Supreme Court and refused to integrate the schools in that state. Lyndon Johnson did so to avoid violence and to protect the students trying to attend. Those circumstances could not be more different than today, when our president has called in the Guard knowing it is more likely to provoke violence than to stop it. We must reject any thinking of our cities as a battle space, that our uniformed military is called upon to dominate, a Secretary of Defense once said. At home, he said, we should use our military only when requested to do so, on very rare occasions by state governors. Those are the words of Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, not Pete Hegseth, of course, not the Fox News version of a defense secretary, and not the Trump defense secretary before him or the one before that. No, those were the words of the first Trump defense secretary, James Mattis, perhaps the only Trump cabinet member in his first term or the present term to leave his office with a stronger reputation than before he arrived. Militarizing our response, Mattis said, sets up a conflict, a false conflict, between the military and civilian society. It erodes the moral ground that ensures a trusted bond between men and women in uniform and the society they are sworn to protect, and of which they themselves are a part. Keeping public order, he said, rests with civilian, state, and local leaders who best understand their communities and are answerable to them. Now in California, we love our National Guard. We revere them as we do the Marines. The Guard is always there when we need them. During fires and floods, after devastating earthquakes, they serve us at home and abroad, always protecting our interests, our lives, our homes, and our freedom. There is a bond between us, a bond of respect, affection, and trust that must not be broken. Donald Trump does not understand this. He cannot understand it any more than he can understand why people choose a life of military service. The man who once called soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who fight and die on our nation's behalf suckers and losers could not possibly understand. Nor does he care about misusing them if it suits his personal or political interests, as his partisan, disrespectful, and inflammatory speech at Fort Bragg makes clear, as does his commandeering of the military for a costly parade to celebrate his birthday this weekend. Now, there is a birthday worth celebrating this weekend, but it is not the president's, and that is the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, an army that my father was very proud to serve in. We can and should honor the Army, but a celebration of the vanity of a president who does not himself celebrate the military but only his control over it, that is not a cause for celebration. Our founders understood the need to insulate the military from internal domestic affairs, from the raucous and often divisive nature of the political process, dominated by party or faction. For centuries, too, so has this Congress, prohibiting the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes except for narrow, very narrow circumstances of rebellion and insurrection. This is vital not only for the protection of the country from a man who would abuse the military to become a king, but also to protect the military from the lack of trust that would accompany its subversion to a partisan end. Our country is approaching its 250th birthday. It is worth remembering why we chose to separate ourselves from our British masters. The preamble of the Declaration of Independence is familiar to us all in its poetic recitation of truths that are self-evident. But what has been lost to us over time were the long list of grievances set out in that document, grievances that drove the impetus for revolution. The history of the present King of Great Britain, it reads, is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. This is what our founders wrote, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. The Declaration provides, in its list of grievances, quote, he has obstructed the administration of justice. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people, they enumerated. He has made judges dependent on his will alone, our founders charged. For cutting off trade with all parts of the world, they objected. For depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, they declared. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, they cited in words all too prescient for today. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures, quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. All of these grievances, so vivid at the time of revolution, our revolution, are so vivid today. And today they can be distilled into a single image, that of Senator Alex Padilla on the ground, face to the ground, and in handcuffs. If you are looking for an image of our democracy in handcuffs, look no further. America, we have a choice. We can rededicate ourselves to the vision of our founders, one born of struggle against autocracy, one pledged to a form of self-governance that elevated the people over the powerful, that believed we possessed sufficient virtue to be self-governing, that we did not need to be governed by a despot. We can rededicate ourselves to that vision, or we can continue to travel down our present path of incivility, of division, of might, not making right, but making wrong, a celebration not of self-governance, but of self-destruction. I believe in this country. I believe we are a great country because we have always strived to be a good country. I believe in this country because of good people like Alex Padilla. Wonderful people, beautiful people, courageous people, patriotic people. Alex Padilla's story is the story of all of us, the story of what's possible in this country. He is a good and decent man. He is a great and capable senator. He deserved better than what he got in that federal building in Los Angeles. The American people deserve better than what he got in the federal building in Los Angeles. Let us remember ourselves. Let us remember who we are. We're the country of Jefferson and of Lincoln and of Washington. We are the country of John Lewis, and we are the country of giants. We stand on their shoulders. We owe our life, our liberty, the opportunity to pursue happiness to their brilliant legacy. We have come to the rescue and liberation of other worlds, of other parts of this globe. We have fought for democracy. We have championed democracy and human rights. We believed in treating others as we would treat ourselves. This is who we are. Alex Padilla face down in a federal building, forced to the ground by agents of the Secretary of Homeland Security. This is not who we are. I can't help but think of the words of my late and wonderful colleague Elijah Cummings, because they have always been such a potent reminder, we are better than this. We are better than this. We are not a country that sends the Marines into a city, not to restore order, but to create disorder. We are a better country than that. We are not a country that needs to have a parade honoring our president, to showcase our military might on his birthday. We are a better country than this. There have been giants who have served in our military. There have been giants that have served in this body. Great people. Come from all different backgrounds. And the strength of this country is that is still so possible. You can come from any beginning and end up here. And we've been a country that has welcomed people from around the world because we've understood they bring their genius and their work ethic and their striving with them, and it has lifted our country forward. We have that beautiful Statue of Liberty, not because we disdain immigrants, not because we view them as a threat, but because we celebrate what they have brought to this country. And I think in the last several years, we have forgotten who we are. And every now and then, we just need to step back from the abyss and remind ourselves of where we came from, and that in this greatest nation on earth, what is possible. I didn't serve with Alex Padilla in the state legislature and didn't get to serve with him or really get to know him well until I came to this body. And I told my colleagues when I got here, you're all wonderful people, but nobody did better than I did in who I got as my seatmate. And I mean that with all my heart. He is a good and genuine and decent and capable and brilliant man. I'll never forget that image I saw today. Because to me, it's the image of what's best in this country being brought to the ground. And so, Mr. President, I ask every member of this body to think about the legacy we've been charged with protecting and what we're going to do from this day forward to make sure that this incredible experiment in self-governance continues and that we never see an act like we saw 2 hours ago take place again in the United States of America. And Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
To recognize the senator from New Jersey.
I just want to first thank my colleague from California for stating it so plain about the character of the individual we're talking about. We have justifiable disagreements in this body. We have strong held beliefs in this body. We have real debates and arguments in this body, but it has been generations and generations and generations since there's been violence in this body. I stand with my back towards the chamber where there was the caning of Sumter during the slavery debates, and a House member came over and beat a United States senator within an inch of his life. You see, there's a decorum here where we have this mutual respect, and we understand that violence is absolutely unacceptable. And if there's anybody that is a man that shows that kind of decency and that kind of peace, my colleague from California put it so plainly. Alex Padilla, like many of my colleagues across the aisle, he's one of the people of true character here. And I think that's why today has hurt so many of us personally, is because of what this breach of this body actually means to all of us. We know the dangers of violence in a democracy and the insidiousness that violence presents or that fear of violent reprisal presents. Jefferson said it so eloquently: when people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears its people, there is liberty. What is so disturbing when you see a member of this body thrown to the floor, a knee on his shoulder, arms being wrenched behind him after he has identified himself as a United States Senator, is literally what Alex Padilla said. I'm going to pull from what I know he's already said publicly, but this is what he also has written privately. Alex Padilla says, if this is what they do to a senator with a question, imagine what they're doing to farm workers, day laborers, cooks, and so many other of the nonviolent immigrants they're targeting. You see, Alex Padilla knows something about this country, which is that we are all, as Martin Luther King so eloquently wrote in those letters from the Birmingham jail, when he was jailed for his nonviolent civil disobedience, what Alex Padilla knows is what King said so eloquently, that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That when you have a president that so exceeds his constitutional authority that he begins to do things to infringe upon the fundamental rights and securities of other Americans, it's a threat to all Americans. This is why right across the way, I can almost see it looking through these windows, why the Supreme Court, with nominees from both parties, with 3 Donald Trump appointees on it, ruled 9-0 in support of the due process rights of someone in our country that was not even a citizen of this nation. Because of the Constitution using the word any persons, knowing that if you erode the due process rights of anybody in this nation, it's a threat to the due process rights of everyone in this nation. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Understand what we saw today. A United States Senator forcibly removed from a room in a federal building. A federal official forcibly removed from a federal building after he identified himself as a United States Senator. But after he was out of that building, they did not stop there. They drove our colleague to his knees and then forcibly shoved him upon his face, wrenched his arms behind him. And Alex Padilla writes that if they do that to me, what are they doing to farm workers and cooks and domestics? What are they doing to other people? What does that mean if they're using the violent force of government unjustly against him? This is a breach. This body has not seen such a breach in my lifetime or longer, where the executive has treated an honorable member of this body in this way. That should be enough. But our colleague correctly points out that if we are in an environment where that is happening to a United States senator, what does it say? If the government of the United States is unjustly taking violent action against a United States senator, dear God, what does it mean for other Americans? That's what Alex Padilla asked today. Now, I will tell you this. This is not an isolated incident. That is the challenge. We have already seen the actions taken against a mayor, a local government official, who himself was forcibly handcuffed, dragged into a police vehicle, held for hours as a prisoner And then when he finally got before a judge, that judge reprimanded this administration for an abuse of their power. Alex Padilla sees this with the violation of the due process rights of individuals going on in this country. Alex Padilla has seen this with a mayor in America unjustly incarcerated, handcuffed, held. This is the challenge we have in this moment. I love this quote by my favorite author, James Baldwin, who wrote this letter the night that authorities came and arrested Angela Davis. He said, "If they come for you in the morning, then they will come for me at night. If they come for you at the morning, then they will come for me at night." This administration, in its abuse of power, in the audacity of handcuffing, of violently assaulting, of forcibly pushing to his knees and onto his stomach a United States senator, what does that say? We all gather right there as senators to raise our hand and swear our oath to uphold the Constitution. But we're not the only ones. Members of the Supreme Court do that. They're not the only ones with members of this body. Administrative officials do that as well. We are bound by the laws of this land. And the terrifying thing for every American should be a government that is not restrained by the law, by a government that misuses its power, and not just its power to use violence unjustly against its citizenry. That's when we slip away from our democratic ideals, from our constitutional principles, and slide towards an authoritarian government that wants to make its people heel before them, kneel before them. That's what I physically saw with my own eyes, a member of this body being driven to his knees for asking a question, for standing up to speak truth to power. What was the response? The response was violence. Being dragged out of that room, being forced to his knees, being thrown prostrate, and being handcuffed. And here is the thing that frustrates me the most. Is this another day where the lead stories will be about the actions of this administration? We've seen a week where it is violating a tradition that's gone back before I was born, where the federal government should activate federal troops in a community it goes through. In fact, I know the statute, Article 10, Section 12-406, that they should go through the governors, work in coordination with them. But no, this was a provocative incident of moving military troops at the expense of taxpayers into a community where even the leader of the police department says this is wrong. All of this, from the beginning of our week to this unprecedented action of violently removing a United States senator from a federal building, from a room, thrown upon the ground, driven to his knees, and handcuffed, this is all purposefully being done in our country by a president that has a different view of his authorities as president. That if a judge criticizes him, he believes it is wrong. He drew reprimand from the Supreme Court for his calling out justices whose opinions he disagrees with. This is a president that doesn't believe in the checks and balances of our Constitution. But the frustrating thing about all of this is it is distracting us. This dangerous, violent distraction from the bill that we should be discussing on this floor about the ripping away of health care from millions of Americans, the cutting of food stamps from millions of children, the cutting of services for disabled Americans, the cutting of supports for our senior citizens, this monumental moment, the biggest transfer of wealth from working people in America to millionaires and billionaires, this moment that should be dominating our attention and our focus, this imminent bill that's being debated and discussed here in the Senate right now that has such incredible consequences, putting $2.4 trillion more of debt in our country, raising the energy costs on the average American by hundreds of dollars. This bill that would raise the premiums of people in our nation by hundreds of dollars. This bill that merits debate and discussion because it is so violative of our common values. This bill that takes food away from the hungry, health care away from the sick, that takes working people and makes their challenges harder, all to give more tax cuts to billionaires and drives up our deficit by the trillions. That should be the central conversation in our country. But this president, almost as if he knows the unpopularity of his bill, the betrayal of his bill, is misusing, abusing his powers, and trying to change the conversation in the most despicable of ways. Abusing his authority, treading on our traditions, violating our Constitution, and now perhaps one of the greatest violent assaults on a member of this body by the executive. This is not metaphorical, this is literal. A member of this body, after identifying himself, physically and forcibly dragged out of a room in a federal building. Then, when the doors were closed, you can see it on the camera, the federal government, the executive branch, taking a member of this body, a member of the United States Senate, a co-equal branch of our government, and driving that man to his knees, slamming him upon his face, wrenching his arms behind his back. That's what we're talking about in this body right now. This is a dangerous time in America. When the president from the Oval Office says, almost daringly, "Do not protest my parade," warns people about protests. And this is the thing that the president of the United States doesn't understand about this country. When a president is violating norms and traditions, violating our Constitution, dissent is not unpatriotic. Protest is not un-American. Silence is unpatriotic. This is a time where protest is justified. Peaceful protest is necessary and vital. This is a time where speaking up and exercising your constitutional principles, like freedom of speech, like freedom of assembly, like the right to petition your government, is demanded by our democracy. When you have a president that so flagrantly violates the checks and balances, so much so that their authorities today kept a senator from stepping forward and asking questions to an executive official, and is met by violence. This is exactly the time that our founders saw that we must stand up and speak up and protest peacefully and let our voices be heard, because silence in a time like this is complicity. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have to see this. It doesn't take that much mental acuity to understand that if this was the Biden administration or the Obama administration and an official used their security detail to put another person in this body, to put a senator from the other side of the aisle on their knees and in handcuffs, we would see outrage. This is not about left or right. This is about right or wrong. And today we saw a deep, grave wrong heaped upon not just this body, but as Alex Padilla wrote so eloquently, upon the ideals. Because if you could do this to a United States senator, then you can do it to another American. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
To recognize the senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Booker and I have now spoken several times on the floor. Senator from California has been here multiple times. We are doing so because we saw the look in our colleague's eyes as he was being violently thrown out of that room. You lost contact with his eyes in the hallway as he was being pushed stomach down onto the ground and handcuffed. One of our colleagues suggested that Senator Padilla got what he wanted. If you saw Senator Padilla's eyes, if you saw Alex's eyes as he was being pushed out of that room, you saw a man who did not expect to be treated that way, who thought that he was coming to register his dissent, his objection to something deeply serious and illegal that was happening in his state. He had a responsibility as a senator to speak truth to power. And so we are here on this floor speaking repeatedly in hopes that at some point some of our Republican colleagues, whether here or in other public statements, will register some degree of concern for what happened to their colleague. We lose our democracy if we lose our ability to dissent. In 1722, in a newspaper started in Boston by the name of the New England Courant, one of the country's first newspapers, a series of essays began to appear that were speaking to some really radical ideas for 1722. This is 20 years before Thomas Jefferson was born. This is 50 years before Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. This is 1722. And the author's name is Silas Dogood. Silas Dogood writes in the New England Courant, "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freedom of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors." Silence goes on to say, this sacred privilege of free speech is so essential to free government that the security and prosperity and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything his own. In 1722, this was a radical idea. This idea that a tyrant must control the freedom of thought with violence in order to maintain control of the people. The New England Courant was owned by a man named James Franklin, and he probably didn't know that Silas Dogood was a pseudonym for his 16-year-old brother named Benjamin Franklin. That's Benjamin Franklin writing in 1722, 16 years old. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freedom of speech. What happened to Senator Padilla today, it does stand in context. I say again, it does matter that on that day in which violence was used against the United States Capitol as a means to try to upset our democracy, it was cheered on by a president who then pardoned those violent rioters. It stands in the context of the arrest of a mayor in New Jersey and a congressperson seeking to do normal and regular oversight and stands in context with the use of the FCC to try to intimidate and harass news stations that carry coverage unfavorable to the president, and stands in context of the banning of outlets having access to the White House or the Pentagon simply because they don't write things that are favorable to the president or use terms that are favorable to the president. If we lose our democracy, it's not likely that there's going to be this one moment, this one day, this one fight. It won't be like other revolutions where the Parliament building gets burned down or a coup occurs. No, it will be that over time the message has been sent that if you speak up against the government, there is a price to be paid, and that price involves violence. But if you use violence on behalf of the government, it will be excused. And so, why we are still on this floor tonight is, sure, we have immense respect for our colleague, and I believe he has respect across the aisle. Senator Padilla is a decent human servant who doesn't deserve to be treated that way. We're here because he's our friend and our colleague. But we are also here because too many in this body take for granted that this democracy is natural, that it is just going to hang around no matter the threats. The effort that this administration is undergoing to excuse and normalize violence when it happens in advancement of the administration's political priorities, and then to suppress nonviolent speech in a multitude of ways. When it objects to this administration's priorities, it sends a message to the public about what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. Now, I don't think this will be the result. I don't think the American people will be bullied into silence. I do not believe they will watch that clip of Alex Padilla being forced to the ground and handcuffed and decide to stay home. No, I think, in fact, the opposite will likely happen. I think more Americans will be out there protesting this government. I think more Americans will decide to be present this weekend to stand up for the right of free speech. But if that were to be the case, it would be the exception to the historical rule. Because in most countries, when a ruler uses violence in order to suppress dissent, it works. People decide that they don't want to risk the fate of Alex Padilla. They don't want to be on the ground with their hands forced behind them and put into handcuffs. They stay home. And they just let the tyranny wash over their community and their country. We're not there yet. I don't mean to exercise hyperbole. What I seek to say is that we should not take this democracy for granted. And that there can be, history tells us there often is, a deep impact when violence is used against those who are protesting the regime. It becomes normalized. And it ends up scaring many people into a descent away from civic participation. And that is where our democracy dies. This sacred privilege, the privilege of free speech, the privilege to protest your government, says 16-year-old Benjamin Franklin, is so essential to free government that the security of prosperity and the freedom of speech always go together. Men cannot be prosperous, he says, without having access to the freedom of expression. Senator Padilla was doing his job. Sure, you can decide that he was being disrespectful but that's not illegal. You could decide that he, in the alternative, should have waited until the press conference is over, but nothing he did warranted the treatment he got. And when you stand it side by side with the pardoning of the January 6th protesters, the attempt to bully the free press into towing the administration's line, the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines to a protest in California that was largely peaceful and basically just encompassed 1 or 2 square blocks, nobody mistakes what that agenda is about. That agenda is about trying to bully the American people into silence. And once again, the first several comments from our colleagues justifying the handcuffing and violence to Senator Padilla simply because they believe he was disrespectful paints a really dangerous picture of where we're heading. Senator Booker is right. The focus should be on the violence that's being done to the American people's health care right now. We're debating a bill right now as we speak to rip health care away from upwards of 15 million Americans. That's extraordinary. That's a healthcare catastrophe. That's not just 15 million people losing their health care. That's hospitals, drug treatment centers, health clinics shutting down when you pull almost $1 trillion out of the Medicaid system. There's a new budget analysis today that shows that the poorest 30% of the country, 40% of the country, will be poorer after this bill passes, just so that the richest 10 or 20% can get a massive new tax cut. In fact, the richest people in this country will get an average $270,000 tax cut. Literally a transfer of wealth from the poorest people in this country. People who are working minimum wage jobs are going to be poorer after having passed this bill in order to enrich the folks who are doing super well. And we're going to add $3 trillion to the deficit. Just going to put it on our kids' credit card. That's maybe the most unpopular major piece of legislation that has ever come before the United States Senate. That's an agenda that you probably can only impose on the nation by force. By force. Because if people have the right to protest, if they have the ability to stand up to the most massive transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the rich in the history of the country, it might not pass. That protest movement might be big enough in order to change the minds of enough members of this body so that that agenda might pass. It may be that that bill is so unpopular that the only way that you can get it to pass is by using violence and the threat of violence to suppress protest and free speech. So we are still here hours after this incident because we care about our colleague, because we believe this is ultimately going to do immense damage to this institution that we love. I've done hard work with many of my Republican colleagues. I deeply care about many of my Republican colleagues. I don't know all of them well, but I know enough of them to know that there are patriots, there are people who believe that America matters more than our party. I showed that video to several of my Republican colleagues as we were leaving the chamber today. I saw their jaws drop. I know their human reaction to what they saw, but I also know that there is a tendency in this version of the Republican Party to circle the wagons around one message, that if Democrats say X, then Republicans have to say Y. That doesn't have to be the case every time. It just doesn't. There can be true things, and a true thing is this. That was an excessive, impermissible amount of force that was used on Senator Padilla today. We can say that together. Even if you agree with the president on his decision to deploy the National Guard, even if you hate every single one of those protesters, even if you don't like Senator Padilla, which is hard, because he's a freaking hard guy not to like, but even if you believe all those things, you can say that what happened today is not all right. And that the White House should admit that there should be an apology, and that there should be protocols set in place to make sure that if a United States senator shows up to a public event, he didn't bust into a private meeting. This was a press conference designed to be public, to transmit public information. He wanted to make sure that that was accurate information. Maybe you don't like the way that he did it, but what he did is not illegal. What he did does not deserve that treatment. We can decide that that's wrong. We can recognize the danger to this concept of free speech defended in 1722 by a 16-year-old Benjamin Franklin is serious enough for us to speak together with one voice. So my Republican colleagues may think that we are belaboring the point, but this is an important moment for the Senate and for the nation. I yield the floor.